Alright, here we are at chapter 16. Pip thinks through Mrs. Joe's assault. He convinces himself that he has some responsibility in the crime, although he attributes his guilt to having just read the Barnwell play. Later, when Pip is more clear-headed, he notices that the culprit didn't steal anything, but left a convict's long-ago filed-off leg iron beside her, presumably to throw off the police. Pip thinks that either Orlick or his convict placed the iron beside her, but he's confused by the motive. His observations allow the reader to understand that it's planted, even if he doesn't understand that. Pip feels guilty and knows he should confess the entire story to Joe, but he makes excuses for himself. His conscience is strong, but his desire to protect his reputation is stronger, and wins. The police do little to solve the crime. Mrs. Joe has suffered brain damage and can't speak. Her entire demeanor has changed, and Joe is heartbroken. She requests Orlick and is delighted when he comes. She then asks for him daily, which is mysterious. Okay, so Mrs. Joe is alive for now. She's just suffered a lot of brain damage. Pip visits Miss Havisham on his birthday, where she gives him a guinea to spend on books. He begins to notice Biddy in a different way, an intelligent young woman who has become pretty. He expresses his admiration for Biddy, redirecting Pip's attention of her intelligence to memories of their friendship. Pip invites Biddy to a weekend walk at the marsh, where he confesses his unhappiness as a blacksmith and his motivation. He wishes to be a gentleman, to improve Estella's opinion of him, and to be worthy of her. Biddy calls Pip's ambitions a pity, and asks, "Do you want to be a gentleman to spite her, or to gain her over?" If it's to spite her, Biddy suggests that ignoring her insults would be best, and if it's to win her, perhaps he should realize Estella isn't worth pursuing. Pip cries, and confesses that he wishes he could fall in love with Biddy. He agrees with Biddy's assessment of Estella, but he knows he won't follow her advice. Orlick appears as they walk home, but Pip feels protective of Biddy. Pip is inconsistent in his feelings for Biddy and his ambition. So he wants greater things for himself. He wants to be a gentleman. He wants to have money. And Biddy is growing into a fine young lady. I'm glad they finally answered whether it was a girl or a boy. And he's got kind of a crush on her, but Estella is apparently more beautiful, and so he's like, well, I'm supposed to be with somebody who's rich and beautiful, right? That's what I'm supposed to want. So he's just following the idea of what he thinks society wants him to do. Okay, Dickens uses the leg iron as a symbol of justice. However, in this case, it represents the miscarriage of justice. He uses the same literary device when Pip expresses his admiration for Biddy, and she begins to cry, which is a symbol representing her love for Pip. Besides, right, she was teaching him to read and to all the math and the English and the stuff that he needed to know to raise the station. She was teaching him that, and it becomes clear that it's because she loves him, not just as a friend, but as more. Besides capitalizing on symbols, Dickens also continues his use of satire to describe the police as satirically comical caricatures. One event that serves as a symbol for common life versus life as a gentleman is when Biddy gives Pip advice about Estella. Pip knows he won't follow her advice since he is overwhelmed by his own ambition and dissatisfaction with life as a blacksmith. Exercise quiet reflection. You want me to just sit here and think? Read the following excerpt detailing Pip's thoughts. Exactly what I myself had thought many times. Exactly what was perfectly manifest to me at the moment. Manifest meaning like obvious. Exactly what was perfectly obvious to me at the moment. But how could I, a poor, dazed village lad, avoid that wonderful inconsistency into which the best and wisest of men fall every day? Wonderful inconsistency, what does it refer to? Probably love. How could I avoid love when the wisest of men fall in love every day? How has the pursuit of stepping up the social ladder affected Pip's love life? Well, it's ruined it, really. It's made him desire and chase a woman that doesn't want him, and that he doesn't really want either, and ignore the beautiful young lady right there next to him who's been with him since the beginning. Okay, moving on to chapter 18. Plot summary. Pip has now been Joe's apprentice for 4 years. So it's another time jump. So that's an element of the Bildungsroman is skipping great chunks of time so that you see the person growing up and you don't have the boring parts in the middle, just the sort of interesting beats of their life. Pip has now been Joe's apprentice for 4 years. At the tavern, Pip recognizes a man from the stairs at Miss Havisham's house. The man tells Pip and Joe that he has personal business with them, and he walks with them to their home. He reveals himself as Mr. Jaggers, a lawyer from London, who has come to take Pip to London. According to Jaggers, Pip has an anonymous benefactor who will give him property when he becomes an adult, and he wants Pip raised as a gentleman in the meantime. He tells Pip he is a boy of great expectations. He said it. Which is literally a monetary inheritance. The lawyer has 2 terms. First, Pip shall always go by his same name, Pip, which will become an important part of keeping Pip's identity. Second, Pip will allow the benefactor to remain anonymous until the benefactor chooses. Pip accepts, Joe accepts no money for the loss of his apprentice, acting with parental love. So he even offered. He's like, I know I'm taking your apprentice. Let me pay you off. And he says, no. This is best for my boy. Mr. Jaggers will be Pip's guardian, which he does only because he's paid. And Pip will be tortured by Matthew Pocket. Tortured. Tutored. Let me just start that one over. Mr. Jaggers will be Pip's guardian, and Pip will be tutored by Matthew Pocket, one of Miss Havisham's relatives. Pip assumes the connection means that the benefactor is Miss Havisham. Pip informs Biddy of his change in fortune, and she is happy for him. Jaggers leaves money for new clothing, and Pip says he doesn't want to show his new fancy clothes to anyone in town, including Joe and Biddy. He sees Joe and Biddy outside his window, and he is oblivious to the reason that Joe and Biddy comfort one another. Both are profoundly sad to lose Pip. He doesn't understand that they actually both genuinely love him. Probably because he's got some self-worth issues at this moment. He thinks of himself as low and common, so he's like, why would anybody love me? But little does he know. Alright. Literary devices. The influence of social class and ambition is evident in this chapter, and Pip's reaction to the news of his great expectations shows that he is already beginning to change. His speech and manners become more refined, taking on upper-class sensibilities he has learned at Sada's house. Notably, the money he will inherit seems of less importance to Pip than the superiority he will enjoy as a gentleman. Dickens continues to use figurative language to get his point across. Pip compares the smoke rings from Joe's pipe to his encompassing love for Pip. A blessing from Joe, not obtruded on me or paraded before me, but pervading the air we shared together. So Joe's love isn't something that's thrust upon him or lorded over him or like, oh, look at how much. It's just something you know is there and is comforting and is all around you. It's genuine love. Exercise. Figurative language. Maybe excerpt of Pip's bedroom may answer the questions. Okay, Pip's bedroom. It was furnished with fresh young remembrances, too, and even at the same moment I fell into much the same confused division of mind between... That's a hard sentence to follow. Ugh. It was furnished with fresh young remembrances, too, and even at the same moment I fell into much the same confused division of mind between it and the better rooms to which I was going, as I had been and so often between the forge and Miss Havisham's, and Biddy and Estella. Okay, so like he's got this room and it's nice, but now he's like, yes, this room is nice, but I could have better. Okay, analysis of Great Expectations, Chapter 19. Plot summary. Pip takes a walk through the marshes, expressing a condescending compassion for the poor creatures of the village. of which he is one. He's from that village. He decides he will send them gifts in the future. Pip falls asleep at the Battery, only to be woken by Joe. Okay, there's a line though when he's talking about sending them gifts. It's not in like a generous way. He says he will send them this and that and a gallon of condescension for the way they had treated him. So he wants to send them gifts not because he's kind and not because he's generous, but because he's going to prove to them how very rich he is, which is, you may know, the exact wrong reason to give people things. Pip falls asleep at the Battery, only to be awoken by Joe, who tells Pip he only needed the night to adjust to Pip's new fortune. After they walk home, Pip talks to Biddy in the garden about helping Joe. Pip visits the tailor, Mr. Trabb, the next day for a new suit. Pip visits Miss Havisham in his new clothing and kneels to kiss her hand. Pip shows that he believes her to be the benefactor, and Miss Havisham doesn't correct him. Pip says goodbye to Joe, but asks him not to come to the coach, embarrassed to be seen with Joe in public while in his fancy suit. He immediately misses Joe and considers returning home to say a proper goodbye to Joe, but continues on. This ends the first stage of Pip's expectations. Okay. Oh, there's a lot on this one. Literary devices. Dickens uses satire again to show how people view the different classes. Learning that Pip has come into money, Mr. Trabb immediately begins to treat Pip with ridiculously exaggerated admiration and puts down his assistant. It's obvious to the reader that Mr. Trabb was only kind to Pip because of his money, but Pip delights in the new status. Pumblechook reinforces this feeling in Pip, fawning over him and constantly asking for the honor of shaking his hand. Whereas Pip had previously been annoyed at Pumblechook's pompous displays, he now enjoys them being directed at him. I don't think that "in" is supposed to be there. Walking in the marshes for the last time, Pip imagines the cows wear a more respectful air now, in order that they might stare as long as possible at the possessor of such great expectations. A ridiculous description that shows Dickens' use of satire, because cows aren't staring and judging Pip. Dickens also shows Pip's transition in response to the great expectations afforded to him when he tells us that Pip is secretly upset that Joe is being so mightily secure of him, showing that he wants to feel superior to Joe. Yeah, Joe is like being mightily secure, meaning like protective. He's being fatherly protective of Pip, and Pip wants to condescend to Joe. Pip wants to help Joe rise in station, so he asks Biddy to teach Joe manners. But Biddy warns Pip to think of Joe's pride. Joe is proud of his trade skills and happy with his appointment in life. While Pip measures himself against others in reputation, Joe thinks only of his personal integrity. But Pip simply puts this off as Biddy becoming jealous, and is upset by his implication that he views Joe as inferior. Okay, so he does view Joe as inferior, and he views Biddy as inferior because he views himself as inferior. He can't help but think that more money makes you a better person. And Joe's sitting there trying to walk the walk. You know, he's trying to be a role model, and say the key to a good and happy life is to do your work well, be happy with what you've got, and it's not in aimless ambition. Whereas Pip right now is obsessed with ambition. That's all he's got is ambition. Joe's trying to show him, you know, there's a balance in life, but it's not coming across. Okay, if you could choose a life different than the one you live, what would you choose? Oh man, yeah, that's a big one. Describe what that life would be like. What benefits and drawbacks do you think this might have? I'm not going to answer that. That's way too personal. Okay. Fill in the chart. According to the characters and events, represent Pip's emerging thoughts on life as a commoner and life as a gentleman. Pip's life as a common boy. He worked as an apprentice. He felt condescended to, and he couldn't see the love right in front of his face. Pip's life as a gentleman. He condescends to people. He feels fancy. He's kind of a jerk. Why does Dickens choose to end Part 1 after Chapter 19? Predict at least 2 changes that will take place for Pip in Part 2, and what his own personal expectations are for him this time and beyond. Alright, hey, 15 minutes, that's not bad for this video. So let's be done with 3.4, and I'll see you in 3.5.